let's talk about the top three takeaways that you can get from the Aaron Hernandez case.
Hi, this is TJ from TJ2.com, and in today's video, I want to talk about several things that you can learn from the Aaron Hernandez case. The top three things, which is number one, excuses will ruin your life, but make great conversation after you die. Number two, whatever you're consistent at in life is what your legacy will be. And number three, obviously, money cannot buy you happiness. So I don't know if you know about the Aaron Hernandez case. He was a professional football player who committed suicide days after being acquitted in a double murder. He was at the time already serving a life sentence for the murder of Odin Lloyd. um, a little background, just so you can get the context of everything, is his dad was abusive to him. Um, his brother and his mother. His dad even punched a football coach of his in the face because he disagreed with his coaching methods. According to his brother, he was sexually molested starting from the age of 6 by an older boy who forced Aaron to give the older boy oral sex, and this continued for like a set of several years, which a lot of people are saying contributed to his problems with his sexual identity. He started his habit of alcohol and drug use when he was in school, early school, think like junior high or high school. Um, he was drafted into college at 17, where they allowed him to graduate over a semester early, even though he wasn't ready educationally. He was not ready to go, but they drafted him into college ball straight from high school, even though the consensus was that he was not ready for the whole thing. Um, Also at 17, he had a very prolific career. Also at 17, he hit a manager at a bar so hard that it ruptured his eardrums. It was settled out of court. The same year, he was picked out of a photo lineup and identified as the shooter in a double shooting. No charges were filed. A few years later after that, I think like 4 years after, 4 or 5 years after that, he was indicted on um, murder for double homicide. And this is actually the case that they reinvestigated when he went to prison that he was acquitted of before he committed suicide. But they originally didn't follow through with any charges when the double murder happened back then. The very next year after that double murder, his friend or assistant, Alexander Bradley, was found lying in a parking lot um, with a bullet wound between his eyes, which he survived magically. He didn't press charges, but he did elect to try to extort Aaron for money. Even went so far as to file a civil lawsuit, which he postponed, and they eventually reached a settlement. Um, because of that shooting, Aaron Hernandez was indicted for witness intimidation, but he was acquitted. And the reason why he was indicted for witness intimidation is because Alexander Bradley was a witness in the most recent double murder that Hernandez was being looked at for. Then, about 6 months after that, he was charged with first degree murder in the shooting of a completely different friend um, who died. He was found guilty, and in Massachusetts, guilty charge in first degree murder automatically carries a life in prison without the possibility of parole sentence. So, what we learn from, and then of course, he was found hanging from his window by his bed sheets in his cell 5 days after he was acquitted of that double murder that we spoke of earlier. And what we learned from this whole, I mean, this, it's just a terrible, terrible situation. But what we learned from this was that money cannot buy you happiness. Um, Obviously, like we all know that, but we all think that our problem is money. when our problem usually is not money, it's the lifestyles that we have and what we do with the money that we have. You know what I mean? But he was signed for the highest amount a tight end could get, like $40 million. Like he was living large. Um, and whatever you're consistent at is what your legacy is going to be. Like his entire adult life before he committed suicide was that he was either a murderer or murder adjacent. Like there, I've never been accused of murder, and if I ever get accused of murder, which I probably won't, um, it probably will only be once. Is what I'm saying is that how do you find yourself in situations where you're consistently and repeatedly being accused of killing somebody? And if that's the case, why haven't you changed your circumstances? Um, a friend of his told the media that being signed to the Patriots was probably the worst thing that ever happened to him because it allowed him to stay in the vicinity of the criminals in Connecticut that he knew, which they say contributed to him living the lifestyle that he lived, um, in addition to all the other things. But he was either a murderer or murder adjacent, and that's what his legacy is going to be. He consistently abused his body with drugs and alcohol, and we'll get into the fact that what they he abused his body with his actual career. Like football ruined his brain. They did the autopsy and found out that he had chronic encephalitis. I can't pronounce it, but what it basically means is huge amounts of traumatic brain injuries that cause excessive brain damage that they're saying is one of the most severe cases that they've ever seen. And he was, and this started years prior. He had been knocked unconscious during a football practice or a football game because he was hit so hard. Like, people don't understand how dangerous some of the things that we get into are. And yes, they paid him millions and millions of dollars to put his brain under that kind of stress, but at the same time, CTE, which is the diagnosis for what was going on with his brain, um, can cause a lot of mental issues, violence, paranoia, agitation, like rage and memory loss, things of that nature. So we might never know whether or not he was just a murderer or if he might have had a chance at a different life. Um, Also, he was considered to be a closeted gay person who fought his entire life to keep that a secret. Excuse me. And I'm not here to say whether or not he should have came out or whether or not he should have continued to hide it or whatever. All I'm saying is that it's one of the legacies that he will leave behind is um, all this fear. It all seems to me to be a lot of fear-based issues going on. You know what I mean? He was paranoid. Like, he even kept a separate private apartment away from his fiancee, where he hid drugs and guns and was constantly talking about how the FBI was trying to get him. And if you're as close to so many homicides as he was, I can understand being paranoid, but we also don't know whether or not his brain issues had anything to do with that. Um, and then there's the whole situation where your excuses will ruin your life, but make great conversation after your death. And that's actually what's going on here. Netflix just released a special, which is the reason why he's back in the media, because like it died down after he was murdered, like after he died in his cell. Um, but the Netflix special is out, and now everybody's thinking about him again. And when I say excuses will ruin your life and make great conversations after you die, I don't mean to blame him for his own death, even though he committed suicide. But there were a lot of things that he used as reasoning and justifications and excuses for his behaviors and his actions, and that other people used as justifications for his behavior and his actions while he was alive. That he blamed his mother, saying that she fucked up his life. While he was in prison, he let her have it and told her she would never know him for who he was, and that she ruined his life. Not that he ruined his life by killing anybody, but that she ruined his life. People blame his father because his father was abusive, homophobic, and because he died when Aaron was only 16 years old, and that and people will say, "Oh, he never got over his father's death." They're literally saying that. Well, he just never got over his father's death, as if that's an excuse to throw your whole entire life away. Nobody gets over their father or their mother's death. It's not something you just get over. You actually have to learn to just live on. It's what life is. Um, Another excuse they were using was his sexuality. The fact that he was always trying to hide it, partially because his father was so homophobic, and also because he was in the sports industry where, being a gay professional football player is just unheard of. No matter how much gay rights are active to this day, it's just not something you hear of. Football players are supposed to be manly men, and manly men aren't gay men. Whatever. But that's another justification and reasoning excuse that people are loving to talk about because he was not openly gay. Now there's so much conjecture. There's a friend that he went to middle school with who said that he and Hernandez had sexual experimentation going on for several years, and now that he looks back at it, yes, they were in a relationship, but they hid it and all that stuff. And I'm like, especially in the black community, we love to say that people are always coming out after we die in order to bring our sins to light or to slander our character. But at the same time, if you're living a double secret life, that's exactly what people are going to believe. And then he also had the whole everybody is out to get me paranoia things. So at the end of the day, and this goes back to what I'm always saying about conspiracy theories, is that he was a paranoid person in life, and when they found him hanging from his bed sheets, uh, hanging from a window by his bed sheets, they said that he committed suicide. First, they said there was no suicide note, and then all of a sudden there were several notes, and they were all written crazy, and there was an Illuminati eye painted in blood on the wall and on his forehead, and we'll never know. You know, we will never know because it was so clear that he was out of his right mind that we will never know whether or not these are things that he actually did or if these are things that were done to him. And I'm not saying either way. At the end of the day, it's just like the Jeffrey Epstein thing. It doesn't even matter who killed him. If he killed himself, if the guards who allowed him access to drug use but were constantly punishing him and wouldn't allow him to transfer to different cells or different areas in the prison, like they have their whole situation. It's something that we will absolutely never know unless somebody goes on camera and admits to it. So there's that. And then the last thing, which is an excuse that will ruin your life but make great conversation, is your reactionary attitude to things. He was known for getting angry at the slightest of issues. Like we all know these type of people who, if you step on their J's, all of a sudden they want to fight. We all know these type of girls who, if you are looking too hard at their eyeshadow or their earrings, they automatically assume that you're staring them up and down and they want to fight. And I'm not saying that that's a lot of people. What I'm saying is that there are people, we all know them. And these are the type of people who find themselves in these specific situations. Not the fact that they would commit suicide, but the fact that they might end up with a murder charge or an assault charge or multiple charges. We've got to be more careful with the lives that we live. And we've got to take every case, no matter how sad and terrible and tragic it is, you have to take the case and learn from it what we can. Because life isn't handing out second chances all like that, as we see. life is no joke. So take care of yourselves.